Save the Semantics, episode 264. It is July 15th, 2024. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. Recording this on a Monday afternoon / evening, so the beginning of the week. Just kind of a quick little catch up on the things that have happened this weekend, which is not a whole lot, but also just wanted to talk about kind of, what I have in store for me for the rest of the week, which also is not a lot, but some things that I do have that I'm kind of looking forward to. Just a little quick little recap, and then obviously, as I have done, I'll do more things to catch up when I record on the following weekend, or this upcoming weekend, rather. So a few things to talk about. So there was quite an event. There was an event that occurred this weekend, which I did not touch upon. And it's not great. I'm not even gonna divulge into it. It's one of those things where I've talked about, things that have happened in the last few years, whether it's COVID or, some other shit that happened. I'll touch upon it for sure. A lot of the times, if I'm kind of vague about it, but if I look at the date and time by which I mention it, it's just oh yeah, I remember, I remember that happening. I don't even I don't, it's when I heard the news about that, it made me just want to, and maybe it's very irresponsible for me as a citizen, as a voting member of society, but it just made me want to further crawl into a ball and just shut myself away. You know what I mean? Even further than what I kind of was in 2020, most of us were, but just even further isolating myself. I'm I think, I consider myself a hermit for certain parts of the year. I think I might just do that full time. If it's just it's so disheartening. It is very just, it's scary for a lot of people too. And maybe it is just very selfish of me to be I'm just going to shut myself and not even participate, or I'm going to run away, as I've heard some discussions happen, the whole kind of immigration or just moving away to somewhere else other than our great United States. I think that's been a discussion that's happened over the years and has kind of maybe picked up again recently, because basically our institutions has sort of failed us. There was a very clear lack of accountability for those that have sizable power or influence, you know what I mean? And, on top of the thing that happened recently, I feel that we are led to believe that we don't have really any sway in the decision making of this country, right? And that really sucks. I really want to be optimistic about things. I think that there are things that we can still do and that I can still do for sure. And I don't really want my outlook to be so bleak, because I think there has been a lot of good that has happened, despite all of the bullshit that has, just this whirlwind of political warfare and everything like that. I think there are still good things that can come out of it somehow. You know what I mean? There's still good. I want to believe that there's good people out there that are trying to make a change and all of that. But it's very hard to stay optimistic when you see things like this and you see other things where, which I kind of touched upon a little bit, last week in regards to the Supreme Court and their decision making, and how they're, one of the three branches of government, and how essentially corrupt they appear to be. It's very disheartening, and it sucks to be kind of in this position. I think that, and even more difficult for some people who might be directly impacted by essentially who gets voted into office next term, right? So it's just, it's very hard to navigate all of these things. It's very difficult to even engage in conversation, because it's just like, I don't even want to, and I don't blame anybody for not even trying to, do something. I try my best to not be apathetic by any means. Whatever, people's individual decisions are regarding whether to vote or not, I think, ultimately I lie on the side that you should try your best to vote. I think voting is it doesn't take that much effort to, vote nowadays. So if you feel there is like a part of you that wants, some change to happen, I think voting is probably the least that you could do if you are registered. But I also am someone who doesn't, I'm not going to put the blame on someone for feeling a certain way, right? Because of just everything that's happened. And, there is, there's a sense of like, there's a sense of this like kind of like fight or flight. I mean, myself, I am not expected to, I'm not leaving anywhere anytime soon, right? I mean, knock on wood or anything, but I think that, the people's decisions to wanting to go somewhere else, I think is valid in a lot of ways. That might be a bit, not controversial, but maybe sort of towing the line a bit, because it's sort of like you're giving up on other people and that sort of thing. Or maybe you're not, maybe you're not being responsible, by not staying, right? But I don't know. You just can't dictate how other people make their decisions and choose their livelihood, or how they want to, if they have family, or if they have other responsible people, or people that they're responsible for in their life. I think that, there's a lot of things that, get taken into account when deciding whether to go somewhere else or not, right? So if you are in a position where you're able to make that move, and you are doing so for the livelihood of your, family or whatever, I don't think that's a problem at all. People immigrate all the time. I think that maybe immigrating from here, could potentially be a bit of a, maybe it's a bit of an overreaction in some cases, because, you still are in, a developed country, and there's a lot of things that the United States has that a lot of other countries don't. So that, that's a whole nother conversation in itself. But if you sort of ethically and morally disagree with everything that's happening, I don't know. I can't say that I would push back too much on someone's decision to get out of here. I can't blame them for that, seeing the headlines, and just, seeing who we have as our candidates, and just the overall politics in general. I think it's fair to say that, if you don't fuck with it, like, and if you just are like, look, I think that this decision is more beneficial for myself and maybe the people around me, then what can you really say, right? I don't know. There's a lot to take into, and a lot to absorb, but I've taken a very sort of, I don't know. I try my best to stay level-headed as I can. I think I used to be a lot more, and I still of course I stay up to date on news and everything that does happen. I think that and I've touched upon this before, as I'm sure I have, but I used to be a lot more easily consumed by the the horrible shit that's happening in the world, right? And just getting just completely, the concept of like doom scrolling, really, right? Which, if you really think about it, is very, it's like, okay, you are informed, you have an understanding of what's happening, but if you really take a step back, you're really not doing much in terms of doing something, right? If you make an action afterwards, such as like donate to an organization or whatnot, that might be ultimately beneficial. But in your act of staying online and staying fully engaged with whatever story is happening, I feel is, I don't know, detrimental. It just doesn't, it doesn't help you. You're not really doing much to, you know, aid the conversation or whatever. Like even if you do comment on something like a thread, I mean, how much of it is really going to be, beneficial to everybody else that's also a part of it, right? That's it's there's a big reason why I don't engage with Twitter at all. Honestly, I think that this has been discussed to death by many people, but Twitter, I think, is just it's considered the worst for a reason, because of the amount of opinions and amount of just, you know, discussion, engagement, if you want to call it that occurs. And you just have to filter through all of that in order to get to something that it might even be considered like reasonable. I think it is I don't know, it's really, it's awful. It's the culmination of just everyone's just instant reaction, and that just further makes things worse in a lot of things. I think there's good reason to be angry about a lot of things. I just don't know how well that can be directed through something like Twitter, you know what I mean? So I don't engage. That shit is not good for anybody. I think that's not good for anybody's health, right? It's really, it's really funny. So back in like, this is early high school, and I'm not gonna credit myself at 14, 15 for making this statement, because it came from, it came from a point of view of me being sort of jealous, is sort of just being kind of like the contrarian person, you know what I mean? Which I kind of like to be at that age. But I was very much like anti Instagram, anti Snapchat during that time. I eventually, got those apps because essentially all of my other friends were on it. So I had to sort of, I felt this need to be on it along with everybody else. But I remember I remember having a conversation with a friend. I think it was just at some, like, I don't know, it was like at some gathering with like other friends. And I was just like talking about, I just like, Instagram and people are like blah, 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 blah. That sort of argument. I know that wasn't coherent at all, but you know what I mean? Like I was just sort of saying like, people on Instagram are doing this and it's melting our brains or something along those lines, right? And I wasn't I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong necessarily. I think I was kind of ahead of the curve. It's more so just like, because now that we've sort of been in a period where we've been exposed to social media for quite a while now, at least for our generation, right? I'm still sort of like, I still am annoyed with the whole generational gap thing, because like it ultimately doesn't like matter that much. It's just an easier way for people to categorize potential differences between like millennial, Gen Z, Gen X, boomer, whatever, right? Like it's all just, it's like, oh, the boomer generation it doesn't fucking matter. Like people cross into different generations. I'm swearing a lot, I'm sorry. Like people, cross into different generations, whatever. Like myself included, I'm sort of like in a weird in between like the Gen Z and millennials. I don't really feel like I don't associate. I don't really, you know, I don't really get the same sort of, I don't know. When like millennials talk about things like, I don't know, Nickelodeon TV shows. That was like a whole thing a little while back. I don't relate to that at all because I didn't grow up watching that. And then there's, the younger generation that maybe talk about, people that are like currently in their like 20s, maybe. They'll talk about a TV show and I'll just have no recollection of it because I didn't watch it at all. So it's sort of like it's a weird kind of, at least my age group is sort of in a weird kind of in between where I personally don't feel I connect to either. I'm too young to be considered someone who, got into TikTok, and I'm too old to be someone who watched I don't know, iCarly growing up. So it's kind of that sort of thing. It's a very generic description of it, but I think maybe hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. Regardless, like I just don't like care about the whole generational discussion, whatever. It's just like people are just gonna get older. When I hit my 30s, it's gonna be, there's gonna be this gap in between what I understand. There already is. There are already things that I don't understand, from kids that are in high school to even 20-year-olds. Like there's things that I just have no like I just don't understand because I'm not on TikTok, pretty much. That's like the main thing, right? So, but for us, I think it's been long enough. We've had long enough exposure to social media where I think I think we now do have a decent sense that it's not good for us, right? It is not at all. There's a lot of detriments to it. I think there's of course positives in terms of, getting into a community or that sort of thing, but that really comes in the form of smaller communities with like certain likes and that sort of thing, but not within the larger mass of like Twitter or Instagram or one of the larger platforms. You know what I mean? So I've gotten kind of a sense of that. I've deleted Instagram for quite a long time now. I just don't feel the need to use it at all. I connect with the people that I already know. So I don't need to really like keep up with other people that are sort of outside of my social circle. It's like interesting to maybe see like, oh, this person got married or this person had a kid, but I honestly am sort of, you just kind of put that away. You just stop, you kind of stop caring, about every little thing about people that aren't really in your lives, right? And then it's like that on top of the other detriments of you potentially just kind of scrolling through endlessly trying to find something that might interest you. So I don't know. I'm glad that I never I'm glad that I deleted Instagram for one, and I'm glad that I never got into TikTok. I think that just would be, yeah, it's a tough, that's like a tough thing to maybe kick as a sort of like an addiction, you know what I mean? But it's just, you just need to, among all of the things that are happening, all of the news and all of the information and all of just the feed that's just getting put into your phone and then through your brain, I think there's a lot of things that I think you should be more cognizant of what you're consuming, and I'm still working on that. I'm still trying to, for me, like YouTube's like a big thing that I just kind of have. So it's easy to sort of just, be stuck on that. But it's you just have to sort of little by little moderate things and take things in just take things in moderation is really kind of the main thing, and not get swept up in whatever is happening. It's okay not to be fully on top of things. I think it's good to be knowledgeable and, have a sense of the current events, of course, but I think it's also good to live your own life as well. Anyways, that's a whole thing. I just kind of got spun off by the crazy things that have, happened recently. Other things yesterday, some soccer, some sports news to break it up. Copa America was yesterday, and then the Euros were also yesterday as well. The finals of those two games happened. Spain won the Euros, and then Argentina won the Copa. Yeah, so congratulations to both nations. I did not watch either game. I did catch up on some of the highlights. I did hear about the whole delay with Copa, and the fact that it happened in the States is just like, oh man, on top of all the other things, it's like our the way in which we handle crowds is just not good, and just the way we handle sports and these large size events is not great. So there's going to be some things that are going to have to be tightened up when the World Cup eventually happens in a couple of years, right? A lot of things that are going to have to be improved in that regard. I think that it's cool to see like Argentina kind of do this like back-to-back, back-to-back sort of winning the chip of winning the World Cup, and then on top of that winning Copa. Copa is to a much smaller degree, of course. The competition is not as high, but it's still impressive to see kind of one country have some level of success, that kind of level of success. I did see Messi got injured pretty heavily, like his ankle is just messed up. That was pretty gnarly to see. Hopefully he's all right. He is older, for sure, so that might be a bit tough for him to recover in time for the Olympics, which are also coming up, right? That's coming up real quick. So, but yeah, just wanted to touch upon that. There's been some the U.S. Basketball team. They've had some kind of friendlies recently. They played against Canada, who they won against, and then they played against Australia today, which apparently was a pretty close game. So you can't underestimate your opponents, man. Even if they don't have the star level that you do, because like who's on Australia? Like they got Patty Mills, they got Dante Exum, pretty good. Jock Landale. Dyson Daniels, it's not bad, but like it's not, it's not, none of these players are starters, right? So, it's just kind of funny, like, looking at these rosters and, recognizing like a few names, and then you look at the U.S. rosters, it's like literally every single player is like, is an all-star, or, there's a few of them have been MVP candidates. It's a little, it's maybe a little concerning if you're a rooting NBA fan or US fan. So I'm someone who, of course, I'm gonna cheer for the US, but it's not one of those things where I'm gonna be heartbroken. I thought it was kind of funny when they got fourth place in the FIBA Cup, losing to Canada, right? So it'll be interesting to see if those two teams eventually meet up if they do meet up in the Olympic tournament. But I guess we'll kind of wait and see. So it's I don't think that you can count out Any team, any national team, honestly, you can't just win on talent alone. I think FIBA showed that. You're gonna have to have some good players, but you're also just gonna have to have good, you know, chemistry and 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 team play. Like it's not gonna come down to a single player doing the best they can. Like LeBron's not gonna be. He is not gonna carry this team to the gold medal. That's just not gonna happen. He needs the help of everybody else, and everybody else is got to step up. You know. So it'll be interesting to see. I've touched upon it before, but I'm excited to see some kind of international basketball competition, and just excited to see some more basketball. It's been a good, you know, season of basketball overall. Like, I know that the playoffs didn't go the way that I really cared for. I just eventually got uninteresting, and I didn't even really. Well, I didn't have you know, I didn't have the time to watch the finals, but even if I did, I don't know if I would have tuned in regularly, just because it just wasn't as competitive as, you know, maybe it could have been. So, but other than that, I think, you know, just how the regular season was, and then the now that we got the Olympics, I think we were in for. It's been a nice stretch of like good basketball, and we're technically in the off season, so that's pretty great. That's pretty awesome. So you can't take this kind of thing for granted. I talked a decent amount about, you know, I kind of gave sort of my first impressions of Final Fantasy X. Actually, before I get into that, I ended up buying another game. I know it's bad, because I've talked in length about, like, oh, maybe I should, like, manage my how much, you know, what I'm spending my money on with gaming, and maybe I need to, you know, take into consideration that I already have, like, a large gaming library / backlog. I don't want to call it a backlog, because it's not a backlog. It's just a library of games that I have on my shelf that I haven't played yet, but I just kind of keep adding to it, and maybe I need to slow down a little bit. But no, I just haven't. I ended up buying Unicorn Overlord, which is something that I have been wanting to play. It is just a matter of finding the time to do so, as always, along with all the other games that I do have. I was thinking it might be just hearing the praise that it had received back when it released. I was considering picking it up, like, earlier on, but, you know, I just sort of held off because, again, I have so many other things that I have on my list. But I picked it up because I do want to play it. I do. I really am intrigued by it. After playing through 13 Sentinels last year, which became one of my favorite games. I loved, like, the storytelling and the art style, and just you know, I had a really great time with it. I was, you know, I was like, this was before. I think that Unicorn Overlord was announced before I had played 13 Sentinels, but I was already interested in playing it. And so when I heard that Vanillaware, the developer, had was putting out a new game, I was interested in seeing it, and I was, like, you know, considering the reception of 13 Sentinels and everything. I was already kind of on board, and when I saw the trailer, and it sort of looked like something in the kind of the vein of Fire Emblem. I was very interested. So, you know, this game had been on my radar for quite some time, and it has been a while since I've played, like, a strategy RPG game. And I know you can argue that 13 Sentinels was sort of in line with that. I think it's a little different. It's you know, it is kind of grid based game. the strengths lie much more with the story. That's kind of really the main focus of the game. But the the combat is there for sure. But like outside of that, it's been a while since I've played something like Fire Emblem, because the last Fire Emblem game I played was Three Houses. That was a while back. I still haven't fully beat that game technically because I've only done one route. I don't know if I will go back. And there's also DLC too. There's just a ton of stuff with it. Fire Emblem Engage came out in 22. Was it 22 or 23? I I heard the gameplay in it was really good, but the story was pretty subpar. It looks really good. It looks really pretty. The graphics look fantastic, but it's got to be like, come on, like for me, it's I gotta have more of a hook with the story than the gameplay itself. I think the gameplay could be really engaging for sure. But when it comes to just RPGs in general, whatever RPGs that might be, if I'm sinking in, I don't know, 50 plus hours into it, I gotta be hooked on by the story. There's gotta be like a thread for me you know, to go off of. Like maybe there could be an example where I really am sort of, engaged with the gameplay and I'm like kind of hooked on it. But, recently I've just been much more wanting to have an interesting story, something, interesting characters, something to kind of like follow along with, something to kind of connect with, whatever, even if the story is like generic, maybe if the characters are interesting, I think that could kind of bring me along. But based on what I've heard, based on kind of some of the videos that I've seen, yeah, I don't know if Engage would be something that I would necessarily vibe with. But who knows? Maybe that might be something to add on the list if once I have sort of gone through all of the other games that I do have on my library. So I've sort of I haven't really played any strategy RPG games. Really, I guess you could kind of put 13 Sentinels, and that was last year. So, but outside of that, it's been kind of sparse because it's not. There just hasn't been anything that's really hooked me. So, I'm really excited to see this. I was thinking, I was thinking of getting the demo for this earlier this year, but I just kind of feel that I have a feeling that I'm gonna like this game, and I know that's sort of whatever. It's kind of jumping to conclusions maybe too early. Maybe having a demo, and playing through just for free and seeing how it goes. I think that could have given me a sense of whether I would have actually liked the game or not. But I just have a feeling that I'm gonna enjoy that I'm gonna like this game. And I think that I used to really, and I still can see myself, doing demos and trying game out and that sort of thing. But I found that I've just kind of liked diving in almost headfirst into the full game itself. And more often than not, just kind of doing something on a whim. And obviously this isn't recommended for everything. I think if you want to, especially if you are making like a financial decision and buying a brand new game, I think if a demo is available, then yeah, why not go for it? But I think just a general sense of maybe reading up on a few things and getting, some just reading up on what other people have been feeling about a particular game and then just going into it, I found that to be a really fun experience, and not doing too much research outside of that and diving into what what's the characters and all of these things. I think just having a very fresh experience with maybe some of the expectation that this game is going to be fun and exciting. I don't know. I found that to be a really, it's been nice to sort of just do that without doing all of the research beforehand of hyping myself up. You know what I mean? I think hype, getting into the hype of a game, maybe something like Zelda or whatever new big franchise game that's coming out, it is definitely fun for sure. But I think going into something as blind as possible has also been a really just it's been nice. It's been nice to just going into kind of a fresh lens, without maybe other people's opinions kind of clouding your judgment, right? Obviously easier said than done, but I was just really, I mean, if it's made by the same people that made 13 Sentinels, I have pretty, I have pretty good faith that this is going to be a good game. And it's going to be different for sure, stylistically and world building wise. It looks very different, but I still think that this will be a great experience. So this is going to be something that I'll probably play. I don't know. I'm guessing. I don't know if it'll be after Final Fantasy X or if I'll put it off until later, because I do want to play Zelda, the new Zelda that's going to come out in September. That's going to be like a day one purchase for me. So yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to like fit it in my schedule, but I shouldn't really worry about it. Speaking of Final Fantasy X, I'll touch upon it a little bit now. I think I'm gonna. I have some, I had some things that I wanted to talk about this weekend that I kind of forgot to touch upon. I'll also kind of delve into more of it as I continue along with the story, but there's a few things that I wanted to discuss. So the voice acting, I was that's like a very, it's a pretty prominent thing that popped up with this game. This is one of the first games that was fully voice acted. And then obviously the first Final Fantasy game that was fully voice acted. So I think that there are some things where there's a little bit of awkwardness in the delivery. There's gonna be instances the voices are not gonna line up that well with the lip syncing, right? But and some of the voice direction is a little questionable. The translation, because I know that some things that are being expressed in the Japanese version of the game, I imagine is difficult to translate it to English, because it's not the humor doesn't always exactly transfer. Like there's some moments, some scenes, it's like, I don't know what the joke is, right? Because there's certain jokes that are just going to be culturally different, within Japanese and English, and it's like, they're just laughing over, what are they laughing about? Like they're just laughing over nothing. Like the character models are doing something. I don't know what they're laughing about. So there's moments like that where it's like it kind of throws you off a bit. But regardless of that, you have to consider that this game is 20 years old. Again, this is one of the first games that was fully voice acted, and there's still, at that point there's still issues with translations going from Japanese to English. And that still is an issue, despite how far we've gone into gaming, right? How far gaming has sort of evolved over the last 20 plus years. There's still gonna be issues with translations and that sort of thing. So I imagine it back then when there was even less resources and tools to do that kind of thing, that the translation's not going to be as good, right? So I can really, you can kind of forgive a lot of the, maybe some of the minor issues that do pop up, but I really don't have too much of a problem with the voice acting, despite the things that, despite the issues that have popped up. I think that the voice, the voice actors, I think they do a very good job of characterizing their respective characters. You get, I think you get a sense of the, I think they convey the emotions very well. I said this, this weekend, but I think that Tita's voice actor does a good job. I think his voice narration is pretty strong. I think I found that to be the most compelling part of, the voices in general. I think he does a really good job of, you know, as I said before, differentiating himself as the, narration versus Titus's character that's happening in real time. I I like Auron's voice. He has a very strong voice and a very clear sense of character. And I think his voice acting is probably the strongest in my opinion. But regardless, everybody else does a good job. I think they do a really good job at giving each of their characters a distinct voice, and then also just a distinct, clear indication of who they are, right? It's not super off-putting by any means. I think you can really kind of buy, you can really just buy, the character and that sort of thing. So I kind of forgot to mention that it is a pretty big piece of information that I didn't necessarily touch upon. The version that I'm playing, which is the remastered version, unfortunately does not have the option to turn on Japanese voices. So the only way to do that is if you, at least on the Switch version that I'm playing, maybe on PC you have the ability to, make some mods. But in the Switch version that I'm currently playing, the only way that you can listen to the Japanese voices is if you switch the system itself to the Japanese settings, and then you can play the game in fully Japanese. But then the issue is that if you can't read Japanese, then it's a little difficult. And that's one of the issues that I ran into. I did originally want to listen to the Japanese voice, but I have a very, very elementary level reading of Japanese, so it's a little difficult for me to stick with the full Japanese text. So that's like kind of the one thing. I've also found, I haven't listened to all of the. I think I might try to, maybe I'll watch some like cutscenes in Japanese or whatever, just so I can kind of get a sense of like the differences between the English and the Japanese. But from what I've heard, I think the biggest difference I've found is the way in which Yuna is being portrayed. In the English, she's very like soft spoken. She's kind of quiet. There's a sense, she's kind of figuring things out. There's sort of like a level of like naivete, if you want to call it that. And I think her voice actor does a really good job of conveying that, of just her being kind of this like soft spoken. She's trying to kind of like, get more courage and get more confidence as she progresses throughout the story as she kind of carries on more responsibilities for the world and her people and everything like that. With the English voice acting, or rather, excuse me, the Japanese voice acting, she's a lot more livelier. She's like very expressive, and I think that's interesting. I don't know how I feel about that because I don't know how in line it is with her character, but it might make for a different experience. So that's like one of those things where I want to see maybe the Japanese and kind of listen through it, or at least see some of the cutscenes and see some of the voice acting in that, just so I can get it. I don't know, because the tone can shift dramatically depending on who delivers their lines and how the lines are delivered. You know what I mean? Like a funny scene could be potentially serious, right? Or there could be just like a line in a serious moment that just completely just like feels just out of tone and out of, it just doesn't feel like it fits with the rest of the scene. So I'm interested in kind of seeing those differences in a similar way to Xenoblade 3. I was very, and I didn't do, I still haven't done like a full playthrough of the Japanese, but I have seen videos and stuff, so I can definitely get, I definitely got, a lot of the differences that were kind of apparent in the Japanese versus the English. I found that I really liked, and obviously, with Xenoblade, I think at least in 1 and 3, the voice acting is excellent. But I really found the voice acting for 3, the English voice acting in Xenoblade 3, to be quite excellent. I thought, that kind of adds on to why it's become one of my favorite games. And I've talked to death about that game, so I won't get too much into it. But I just think that there's a clear, I don't know, they just do a very good job at characterizing their, individual characters. In particular, I liked Senna's voice in the English version more so than the Japanese version. So that's kind of an example of that. Anyways, kind of jumping back to Final Fantasy X. Again, so far, I've really liked the voice acting. I think it's complemented the game's story and well. It doesn't feel out of place, is what I want to say. I think sometimes with Japanese media, especially anime and stuff, I don't like listening. I don't like, especially with anime, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but especially with anime, I really don't like listening to dubs because there's too much in terms of the way characters express themselves that it just works with the Japanese more so than the English. Like English, we don't emote as much. We don't do Aizuchi with English. I do Aizuchi when I talk because that's just like a habit that I've kind of picked up because of learning Japanese earlier as a kid. But most people don't do don't do Aizuchi. When I mean by Aizuchi, it is essentially, it is an expression, it is a noise that you make acknowledging that when someone is talking to you, basically. That's very, very common. If you watch any anime in Japanese in particular, you'll notice that, when the characters go like, like when they do those noises, that's what Aizuchi is. It's sort of like them responding back to something in dialogue, right? Or it's like, like those noises that they make. You're like, what? Why do they do that? That's why they do that. It's because it's just them. It's them responding to the situation, and it's also them like acknowledging that the other person is being like heard. Is sort of my very brief explanation of what that is. And that's very off-putting hearing that in dubbed English in anime. It's because it's just not like a natural thing that English speakers do. I don't think that's a thing that we do typically. So and then just the expressions, like certain things, like whenever people are like, it's like Yamato senpai, like that just don't like that just throws me off. Like I'm just gonna listen to the Japanese, and no disrespect to any anime voice actor by any means. It's just those things are gonna get lost in translation. It just doesn't work for me personally. I dislike that because it just sounds awkward, and it's just like it just doesn't fit in my opinion. If people like dubbed anime, that's fine, cool, whatever. I stick with the subs. I'm not someone that's going to be like subs over dubs by any means. It's just what I prefer. If you like dubs, that's fine. Anyways, that's my little brief kind of spiel on the voice acting. Some other things that I kind of wanted to touch upon, just like very briefly, before maybe saving this conversation as I continue as I progress through the game. I think that one of the things that really sticks out to me with this game, more so than maybe some more so than some of the other, I don't know, Final Fantasy games. I guess like 9 is, I don't know, 9 is kind of an exception, but the environments in this game are incredible. It's a very beautiful game. Each place has its own like identity. You just the way kind of when you move from one location to the next, like it's just like, oh, you're here for sure. It's just like the colors and just the music, of course, is awesome. They do a really good job of like capturing that. I think sort of the fantastical elements of this game, I think, were maybe kind of carried over from 9. And I know that there's different development teams and stuff like that, but the core ideas probably maybe were shared within Squaresoft at that time. But like the fantastical elements of 9, I could see some of that in 10 as well. Sort of like when you're going into somewhere like the far plane, and you're just sort of in this like ethereal area where there's these like giant waterfalls and you're on top of the clouds. It's cool stuff. I really like that. I think it's really cool when they have this. It's just almost, these locations that are almost physically impossible to imagine in real life, right? I think is cool to see and traverse through. I've heard that there's some other things to touch on. I think there had been a lot of, criticisms levied toward the game in regards to the fact that there's basically no world map, and everything is kind of like, one path and stuff like that. Maybe I already talked about this before, so I'll keep it kind of brief, but I don't really have too much of a problem with it in this game. And I know that this style of game kind of popped up with Final Fantasy 13 as well. So, and I've heard a lot of criticisms about 13 in the past, but I'm willing to give it a shot. I feel like if I can enjoy this game, where there's maybe not the same level of exploration or the same level of like, discovering places and maps and that sort of thing, and then I feel like maybe I'll enjoy 13 as well. And I know that's a different game. I know that maybe the story isn't quite as interesting, but again, you can't really knock it till you try it. So, those are kind of my thoughts. I feel like I'm probably missing out on some other things that I wanted to talk about. There's more that I want to talk about with the story and my thoughts, because I feel like I've made a good amount. I've gotten to like a pretty good spot. I've, you know, I think I've progressed quite a bit, but I just can't. I just kind of forgot what I wanted to talk about, to be honest. So I'll save that discussion for later this weekend as I kind of continue with the story, because I think there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of really good stuff. Just in regard to, things like identity and belonging and death and all of those things. There's good stuff. Religion, accepting your responsibility, deciding whether you are sacrificing yourself for the greater good, or if you want to maintain your individual self for your own purely selfish reasons. I don't know. There's a lot to kind of delve into there. So I think, yeah, I'll save that for later this week or this weekend. Anyways, I've talked a lot, talked a lot more than kind of I expected today. So I'll save further talk and discussion for this weekend. All right, it is July 20th. Recording this on a Saturday evening. Kind of nice. It's a nice and cool climate right now. It's pretty hot. It's pretty hot today. It's pretty hot these last couple of days. So I did yesterday. I went on a walk. I just walked around kind of town and stuff, and it was way too. I was kind of over my head. I didn't realize how hot it was still at 7:00. Today's a bit cooler for sure, but yesterday was just toasty as hell, man. I was sweating. It's I know it's not as gnarly as some other places, but it's just not something that I'm particularly used to the kind of the heat at in kind of the late evening, you know what I mean? So that was something. This past week's been pretty nice. Outside of, some heat, occasional heat waves going on. But yeah, other than that, it's been nice. I went to the gym for the second time on Friday, so yesterday. And was it yesterday? No, Thursday. And it was good. I was less sore than I was the first time around. I really think it was just the fact that I hadn't exercised those muscles in forever. So it took a bit to catch up and acclimate to that kind of thing. Just because lifting weights is not something that's part of my daily routine and hadn't been for quite some time. So it took me a bit to recover, but this time around I didn't feel as sore. I feel I kind of I'm trying to I want to ease back into it, but I also do want to push myself to the best of my abilities because I know that I can do more than what I'm currently doing. It's just a matter of I don't want to feel like complete shit after that, you know what I mean? So maybe I just need to temper my expectations a little bit and be a bit more, I don't know, just be a bit more aware of my limitations right now because I'm not to the same level of strength or activity as I was before. So just kind of just really build back into it and then afterwards continue with it, because that's also the hardest part is obviously starting, which I have, but the second part is just going to be continuing to maintain a decent enough routine to where I feel comfortable and I feel like I'm actually being active and I'm kind of building strength. So yeah, that's a whole thing that I'm kind of trying to figure out for the time being. So, but it's nice though. It's nice to exercise. The other thing I need to do is get back into running. I haven't ran in forever, and it's not great. I do want to. It's just I've found that I've really just liked doing walks and stuff, but I need to supplement that with something else. I do need to try to push myself with my endurance and everything like that. So, yeah, it's just been working out has been top of mind recently. So I want to I want to kind of really build back into it and have a better sense of, schedule in terms of working out and figuring out things that I kind of want to do better. This so today there was another exhibition game between Team USA for basketball and South Sudan, and this game has done nothing to quell any fear or any sort of, maybe potential disappointment, because they only beat them by 1 point. And you have to give a huge shout out to South Sudan for putting up their performance. And it just really kind of exemplifies the fact that pretty much the rest of the world has caught up. And that's been known for a while now, but I think just the fact that a country of the size of South Sudan has the ability through teamwork and even skill to get to the level of versus a team that has world-class athletes, literally some of the greatest players of all time, I think is really impressive. And I think it shows that there's a lot of competition nowadays. I mean, you could, again, I'm pointing back to like FIBA back in last year when the U.S. got fourth place against Canada. But the rest of the world is kind of there, man. Like it's not the same. It's not the same as it was back in the 90s of the Dream Team, right? It is, you got real heavy competition now. Some of the best players in the world are not from America, right? So it just, I think it's pretty exciting to see. I think it's really cool to see. I think seeing the results of this game, seeing the results of some of the other games that have happened, I think there's a lot to look at for the US to think about how they're sort of figuring out just the construction of their team and who starts and who sits and who they want to sort of lean towards. Like LeBron was the one that kind of helped pulled off the win. I watched the highlights, and he was the one that essentially closed the game out for for the US. Like, as I said, like you cannot rely on him to be the only guy, you know what I mean? And they're gonna have to figure some stuff out. I don't think it's gonna be an easy, as I said before, I don't think it's gonna be an easy trek to gold medal. I just don't believe that to be the case. There's just too much. I think some people are just far too overconfident about the odds, and it really, the odds don't matter. It's the thing that's going to come up is how well the team works together, and how cohesive they're going to be, because just kind of based on what I've seen, it just doesn't seem like they have a sense of, they don't have real, like, their identity is that they just have a bunch of the best players in the world. And that's, if you look at even within the NBA itself, that hasn't always worked out. Just putting all of the best players, on one team, the kind of the super team, if you will, that hasn't really, that's worked out in some cases, obviously, with like the Miami Heat of kind of, a decade ago, or obviously the KD Warriors, but it's also been a while. The teams with the best pieces that kind of fit together. If you look at the Boston Celtics that won these past finals, like they had really good players, but there's not really necessarily, it's not a team full of superstars, right? Like Tatum is a really good player, but he's not to the same level as someone like LeBron or, Steph. Like it's just not. They just had a very well constructed team, had a sense of identity in terms of their defense, their ability to make threes. Like it just there's they all kind of came together. So it's very different. And with the U.S., it just doesn't seem like there's, it's like defer to LeBron when it gets tight, or maybe Steph. It just doesn't, I don't think they've like figured it out yet. And they got like another week before the Olympics actually start. So it'll be interesting to see, how that goes. But, there's some real competition, man. I am not confident that they're going to get the gold medal. I think obviously they're going to be the favorites, but there's going to be some strong opposition again from teams like Germany and France. Like there's going to be a lot of pushback for sure. So I'm interested. I'm very excited to see how the rest of the world stacks up. I think there's going to be people surprised. I think there's too much of this sensibility that the U.S. is just going to steamroll. That's not. I don't believe that to be the case at all. There's just too many. There's just too many other good players out there, for that to be the case. So we'll see when that happens. It's coming up in a week. It's kind of crazy to say because it still feels like there's this, and maybe I'm just not paying enough attention, but there just doesn't feel. It just doesn't feel like there's the same level of excitement that I'm getting that I have from past Olympics. I don't know. There just seems to be this kind of lack of media coverage going on, which is really strange, considering this is one of the biggest sporting events, ever. Or I mean, just in general, the Olympics are the biggest sporting event outside of the World Cup, right? So the fact that there's just not really a ton of notice, I don't even know when like the opening ceremony is. Like I have to like look this up. There's nothing coming out. Like why isn't, I don't know. It's very weird. Because I feel like there might be, there should be some sense of excitement coming up. You know what I mean? But maybe that begins to ramp up in this kind of upcoming week. But we'll see. Maybe after Tokyo, and because of the fact that it was held, during COVID, and it just wasn't the same, and maybe there's been kind of this. There's also a sense of distrust with the IOC and everything. Like I don't blame people for not getting excited, because the Olympic Committee is very questionable and corrupt and all of these issues. So it's not something that, I'm not saying that you should get excited. I'm just saying it's a pretty big event. And I feel that there was, back when I was a kid, I think the most prominent, Olympics that kind of come to mind for me are, the Beijing Olympics in 2006. What else? There was like the Sochi Olympics. Those ones are kind of stick out to me, maybe because I was a kid, maybe because I had the time to pay attention to those things. But I feel there was just much more, I don't know. There was much more fervor. There's much more excitement going on, and now it just doesn't. Maybe because there's just so many other things that are happening, and it just doesn't really, this kind of world event is sort of like a bit of is kind of this weird distraction that people might not care about anymore. I don't know. It might just be me. It might just be me, but it's there could also be the case. There could be an argument made that cable television was still a thing in the mid 2000s. We didn't have the same level. Facebook was just getting off. So because there wasn't as much of a, you know, everybody was still watching TV, so more eyes were on the screen. Less, there were other, there were less things to pay attention to, right? And then obviously now with the social media, blah blah blah, blah, like it's there's way more things that are available for people to watch. So that might be also be the case, right? Where people just their attention is diverted from a single monumental event, and they're just their focus is elsewhere. So I that could also be the case as well. I think there's probably a number of factors as to why there might not be as much attention paid to the Olympics currently. I don't know. I think there's a lot of things to consider. But that's kind of what I think. I have made some pretty good progress in Final Fantasy X. There's quite a lot of things that I want to talk about. It's going to be a mess. So when it comes to certain games, especially games that I've found to be very passionate about, most notably in terms of, you know, the story, the characters, the thematic elements, I kind of like jot down certain ideas, certain threads, plots, concepts that I kind of pick up on, and then I just like jot it down in my notes app, and then I kind of try to figure out how I want to talk about it on here, right? But it is just kind of a lot of discombobulated thoughts just kind of thrown out there. But let's talk. How do I want to start with this? I think one of the big prevailing themes with Final Fantasy X is death, and that's, you know, it is kind of interesting going from something like Xenoblade 3, and while that game was like a couple years back now, which is crazy to think, because I feel like that whole release cycle, it did not feel that long ago, but it has been a couple of years since it came out. That game heavily centered on death. In a sense, that game also dealt with this sort of, you could say, kind of metaphysical concept of death. The world is in a constant spiral of death, and in a very similar sense to Final Fantasy X. And I don't know if that's something maybe you know, Xeno 3 was inspired by this game, or, you know, they were just inspired by, you know, concepts of death in general, like that. I mean, it's not anything notable, right? Obviously, you can point to things like, you know, Dante's Inferno, or other, you know, other tales of just kind of death and how there's this constant cycle of life and rebirth and all of these things. But it is really interesting how I could see like a very similar thread happening, how I see a very similar way in which death is kind of portrayed in a very physical sense, right? Because the world in Final Fantasy X is called Spira. They directly reference it as being this kind of spiral of death. I do kind of want to some slight spoilers, I guess, if you are interested in playing this game. There is a place in the game called the Far Plane, and it sort of exists as this afterlife sort of thing, where when someone dies, and if they are properly sent by a summoner, then their sort of essence, their kind of, maybe their souls, their bodies, whatever you want to call it, they exist in the far plane now. But if that person is not properly sent after death, they still exist in a state in between life and death in the world of Spira. So they're not truly dead. They still can continue to live. And these characters, they kind of like they're really clinging on to life. It feels like they're just not willing to let go of their lives. Like they want to just continue existing, and that's kind of like a sense of conflict in within the game with some of the characters, and it's very interesting. I have found that I really have found, this sort of idea of existing in one space but also existing in another to be really interesting and fascinating. Because, this game, if you get kind of caught up in it, I think it can be pretty easy to kind of get lost. It's a little, as I said before, I think it's one of those games where it's hard to discern what exactly is reality. And I think at this point in the game, I have a sense of what the reality is, but I could still get shocked, and I could just completely be thrown off by another twist in the road. But I think that some of the reveals that have been given in the game, I have an idea of what is kind of sort of really happening. You know what I mean? But it's like there are just all of these characters who it's like, do they really exist? It's like, what does it mean to be? What does it mean to be alive? Is also another thing to consider in this game, right? Does it mean to have a living, breathing body? Does it mean to, you know, actually occupy some sort of space? Does that mean to be alive? There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of characters where you kind of like look at them and you're like, what are they really? It's like what exactly are you? Like, what is your sort of role in this world? There's a lot of questions, and I'm very excited to continue going forward with the story to figure out these kind of little mysteries and things kind of start to like piece together. But I have really, I know I'm just kind of talking in circles and reiterating kind of a lot of the same things that I've already discussed before, but I have really, I really like how the story, kind of opens up. And I've really liked how there's little pieces of information that kind of just little hints that kind of like dropped off as you continue along. And the point in the game where I am currently, I have a feeling that there's going to be quite a lot that's going to be revealed, and I'm really looking forward to how that works, and how that's gonna how that's gonna be reflected, upon the rest of the story, and how that's gonna maybe change some of the way in which I'm looking at the story and the world. Those are like some of the, that's like a really great, storytelling device, is where, as things are revealed, if you do happen to play back the game again, you start to pick up on you pick up on things that you didn't before, and you have an understanding of like what actually happened, and what this character is and stuff like that. And I really like that. There's a part in the game that I just saw that was I thought was incredibly well done. So at the very opening of the game, they show you a scene It's basically the is a scene right before the title screen, and they show the main cast of characters, and they're just kind of like, you know, they're kind of like bonding over like a fire and stuff like that, and then you have the main theme of the game kind of playing over it. Just the beautiful piano theme. It's pretty well known as like one of the one of the most kind of famous video game songs. And it's a beautiful song. It's a beautiful piano song. It's gorgeous. It's great to listen to, even without having to know the story or whatever. I've heard this song before, but I didn't. This was before I played the game. But as you progress through the game, there are points where this song comes up again, and this song came up again, plus the scene from the beginning of the game. We essentially reached the point of the game where this sort of title screen, the opening scene takes place, and it just changes everything. It changes your entire kind of perception of what that scene meant, right? Because when you start off the game, you just kind of are like, oh, this is cool. You get to see the band of characters just kind of like hanging out and bonding. But when you get to that point, it hits you so much harder. It's so well done. I was just like, oh wow. I was like, this is a good ass game, dude. This is some good shit. Like the emotional impact that it leaves on you is just so well done. Like I just wasn't, I don't know. I wasn't expecting it. Cause like I just wasn't like thinking about, oh, this, I was thinking like, okay, maybe this scene might pop up later in the game at a certain point, but just the fact that it just completely changes the tone of the scene, knowing what you know leading up to that point. And then on top of that, now this song, this main theme that you first heard just holds such a different meaning because of the experiences the characters have gone through, of how the story has progressed. And this song means so much more now, and it just comes together so well. It's so good. Like it's like it's incredible. Like I don't know what to say. Like maybe I'm like over exaggerating a little bit, but it's just the way this was tied together, and the fact that they referenced it back to the beginning and they brought it back, and now this scene means something else so much more. It's just it's so well done. It's good. Like it's really good, and I'm very, I don't know. It just like kind of hit. It hit pretty hard in a very good sense too. And it just like this game I already liked, kind of because of the little things that came up in the story, and all the other things that I've already talked about. But once I've gotten to this point of the game, I've really have grown to love this game. I'm not even, I don't know how much more I have left, but I think that I get a sense to why, and I have an understanding of why this game means so much to a lot of people. And I think it's really cool, and it's really great, and I'm really happy that I'm playing this for the first time. And I'm happy that I decided to kind of pick this one up before I got into some other things, because I think this is like the perfect timing now where I do have a little bit of time to get into some other games and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm done gushing about that scene. So I want to talk about like a few other things that kind of came up. Religion's a pretty big one. Religion in relation to, the themes of life and death, and how, I think I don't want to say too much. Like, if you've played like a JRPG, it's just like, there's kind of like the meme church is bad and that sort of thing. And to an extent, maybe you get a sense of that. I don't want to give away too much, but maybe you get a sense of that in this game as well. It's more so like when religion or when faith is sort of used as sort of like kind of this manipulation tool, as a way for others who are in power to, you know, take advantage of it and then take advantage of other people, is kind of where, this religion factor or religion kind of factors in to this story. Again, it's not like a novel concept. This has been explored many, many, many times in other games as well. But I think it's interesting to kind of touch upon that, considering how like heavy of a theme death plays in this game, and how this kind of religious organization, how it looks at death, and how it sort of wants to proceed with people. How do you deal with people dying? Like, how do you sort of go about it? And there's like the process, as I mentioned, of sending someone off into the far plane and that sort of thing. But then there's also issues of like, continuing to exist even after death, and how do you look at that as a religious authority? Like, there's a lot to consider. There's a lot to digest with that. But I think it's good to sort of include that in the conversation, even though in a lot of way maybe that it is sort of ground that has been tread many times before. But I think it's still something that can be discussed, over and over again. Like, it's not necessarily just limited to religion necessarily, but also some higher authority, some political power, using manipulating people based on whatever their beliefs of whatever that might be, and then using that to kind of their advantage for their own benefit, right? So I think there's a lot to take away there. Some other things I think. So this is something that came up super recently in kind of my playthrough is dreams, and the concept of dreams, and how dreams are an idea that can sort of exist, and it's I don't want to go to like crystal, like crystal lady, but it's sort of the idea of like manifesting an idea to become reality, which I think is also very fascinating. Dreaming of a concept for it to become, like an actual tangible object. Very, I don't know. It's super abstract, but I really like it. I really I'm hoping that they continue to kind of explore with that, because I don't know. I find dreams to be just super fascinating and interesting, because it's not something that it has been successfully explained by scientists, right? Like there's a lot of things where in how your dreams can be interpreted, and how your dreams can be affected by the state of mind that you're currently in, but it doesn't explain all the zany things that can potentially happen in dreams, and why those things can happen, right? So there's still many things that are kind of left unexplained about dreams, and I think that discussing that through a medium like video games, I think, can give it a lot of ways for the person playing the game and also the creator to really sit and digest it and think about it and just consider the possibilities of what dreams actually kind of entail. You know, are dreams actually a potential form of another reality? Like, I don't know. You don't know. Like, is it maybe, do we exist in dreams as well, along with existing in our current, corporal state? Like, I don't know. Maybe. Just something to consider. So I don't know. It's fun to just kind of play with those ideas. And I think it's cool that they sort of drew that into the story as well, to make it, to spice things up, to make it more interesting, along with all the other things that are happening in the game. There's a lot. I jotted down just like some other things. Okay, so I jotted, these are what I kind of threw on here. I threw on killing the father, letting go of the self, the concept of death, the concept of sin. And this is another thing as well. Sin existing as an actual physical representation of sin, I think is cool. Marriage, religion, I already touched upon that. Death, I touched upon it. Dreams, I also touched upon it. And then obviously, I already gushed enough about the recontextualization of the opening scene as it as it kind of gets revealed later on in the game. So those are kind of the things that I I touch upon. I think there's a whole discussion that can be had about sin as a character, as a concept, the way in which it is manifested in the world of Spira. I think there's a lot to talk about there. Why does sin exist in this game? Like, how did sin come to be, right? Is it really just simply a physical representation of the atonement that people have to face, right? The fact that they need to come to terms with the way in which how the humans' sinful behaviors and the fact that maybe they flew too close to the sun with the technology that they created and neglecting the good virtues of being a human. I don't know. It could be, right? Is sin maybe an act of mercy for humans? I don't know. There's a lot I don't know. I'm just throwing thoughts out there. But it's all good stuff. I'm excited to continue playing it. I'll probably talk about it more as it continues to go on. I'm thinking, I tend to sort of stay away from discussing spoilers and that sort of thing when talking about games, because I just don't. There might be someone who happens upon this and really wants to play the game and that sort of thing. So I maybe will discuss, maybe a separate podcast. In a separate podcast discussing maybe the spoilers and then the full details of the game, because I think there's a lot to get into, and I think it would be I don't know, there's a lot to discuss there, and I do want to talk about it more, but it's sometimes a little difficult to kind of skirt around the actual details of what's happening, but maybe I'll do that in a separate episode, or maybe I'll just save it for another podcast. I don't know, we'll see. But just wanted to do a quick catch up on a few things. Other than that, hopefully people are just kind of staying safe out there, because it's crazy world, crazy shit going on right now. So, hopefully this provided some kind of reprieve, if it did. Anyways, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening as always. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.